08453 009956. Let's speak to Jonathan Davis. Jonathan Davis is a wealth manager and economist. Hi, Jonathan.
Good morning, Adrian.
Have we cut too far and too fast?
We haven't been cutting at all, and those who say we have simply don't understand. We're actually borrowing more now than even Ed Balls wanted to borrow. That's quite an achievement. No, what the government has done is reduced the rate of increase in public spending. The cuts are still to come.
Well, the cuts will have affected, Jonathan, I can assure you, many people listening to my programme this morning, people who work for local councils who no longer have a job.
I understand that, but they are not cuts. We have not cut public spending. Look at the numbers. What they have done is reduce the rate of increase. I'll tell you what one of the problems is, and the Taxpayers Alliance mentioned it yesterday. There's over 100,000 local council managers earning over £100,000 a year. That's where the problem is. Those guys are cutting the front line while keeping their empires going.
Let's speak to Ruth Porter from the Institute of Economic Affairs, a free market think tank. Hello, Ruth.
Morning.
Do you agree with Jonathan?
Yeah, I do. I mean, what's so interesting here, I think, is that actually, if you look at the coalition's approach, is that they haven't really implemented many of the cuts yet. I mean, there's another important thing that we need to remember, and that is that they have already implemented some of the tax rises. So in some senses, they've got this the wrong way round. What they should have been looking to do was to start off by cutting, so reducing public spending and getting that under control, and only increasing taxes, so things like VAT, putting up national insurance, if they absolutely needed to, as the last resort. And that's what all the evidence shows is actually the best way to get economic growth. On the other hand, I think,
So let me just understand that, Ruth, then. Yes, cut the public sector, make people who may be doing very useful and important jobs in social care and so on, make them unemployed because we can't afford them. But for those who still have jobs, you should not be increasing taxes.
Well, the key thing needs to be looking at how we actually create jobs so that we can afford to have decent hospitals, decent schools, we can have people working in the private sector so that the economy is growing. And we have been spending. The public sector's grown to a point where we've got so many people employed in it that we couldn't afford it. So redundancies in the public sector and cuts in public spending are inevitable, and over the long term they're a good thing. But there will be a transition phase where it, of course, is going to be painful. But what we need to make sure is that we get the economy growing so that those people who lose their jobs in the public sector can get jobs in the private sector. And the way to do that is to reduce public spending, it's to cut regulation, and it's to cut taxes. And we've seen the coalition go some way towards announcing that they're going to cut taxes. So we need to hope that they're going to follow through in implementing all of those spending reductions, that they're going to follow through in implementing those. But what we need to see is the coalition to go further and to look at another round of spending reductions that would help fund tax cuts as well.
But won't that more spending reductions will mean more people thrown on the dole, fewer people in the economy with money to spend? That is a recipe for ongoing contraction. We'll get the economy going smaller, surely.
If those spending...
Adrian.
Go on, Jonathan.
We're missing the biggest issue here. You know, the 80-20 rule. If you 20% of your costs come from 80% of your costs come from 20% of your issues, the big issue is the bank bailouts. We are subsidising the banks to the tune of £100 billion a year. That's equivalent to 200 full NHS trust hospitals every year. We need to stop bailing out the banks. That way, the government will have all the money it needs to do whatever it needs to do.
Ruth, one of our earlier contributors made a similar point. You know, the banks are the biggest welfare scroungers of all.
Well, we have bailed out the banks, so it's too late to go back.
But we're also
doing it.
We're subsidising them through this process of quantitative easing, which helps to shore up the bank's balance sheets as well, which is effectively the government printing money and giving it to the banks to help shore up their balance sheets.
Yeah, I mean, there's issues around that and what the Bank of England should be doing. But the key thing that the government should be looking at doing is actually looking to try and get some tax cuts going. And in order to do that, they're going to have to make further spending reductions. And that's the only way that we're going to see the number of jobs created that we need in order to get the economy growing properly again.
Jonathan, would tax cuts and yet more people thrown on the dole, aside from your issues with the banks, would that help, or would that not end up contracting the economy even further?
The problem with the media is that you guys always focus on one or two issues at a time. And in answer to your question, a cut in public sector spending and a cut in taxes, yes, I think after an hiatus would have a positive effect on the economy. However, not much of one. We have to have a wholesale change in policies, which includes the following: cuts in public sector spending, cuts in taxes, move in taxes from wealth creation, which is income and corporation tax, to property, which is non-wealth creation. Ban bank bailouts, raise interest rates so that savers have actually got some money that they can spend. By doing all of those things, we will cut the cost of living, we will cut the cost of running businesses, and we will create an environment which will be great for our long-term future. The problem is, all of it is politically untenable, so it won't happen.
Right.
Instead, we will continue with the policymakers, which is the government and the Bank of England, having all of us in a vice grip of depression for the next 20 years. Double-dip recession, that is painting a positive spin on it. We are in depression because of general economic policies.
Jonathan, thank you so much for joining in today. Ruth, is Jonathan making sense to you?
Well, if we go back to where we started, so what these figures actually show, whether we are in recession or not, they might well be revised up. They're only preliminary. So we need to be careful about using this term recession. But what they do show is that we are clearly in a place of stagnation where our economy is just flatlining. And although the term recession might economically in this situation turn out not to have been correct in terms of a double dip, politically, the term recession is hugely dangerous. And so what I would be hopeful of is that perhaps the fact that this term has been used here and these figures have come out, that this should give the government a sense of urgency that they do need to look at where they can find further spending reductions to fund tax cuts.
All right, Ruth, thank you so much for joining us. Ruth Porter from the Institute of Economic Affairs, Jonathan Davis as well, an economist and wealth manager. So much food for thought in what they are saying. Jonathan's feisty, isn't he? 08453 00 9956. It's like Simon in The Inbetweeners. I feel like saying to him, "Ooh, you're a feisty one."